My name is Bob Harrington. I was a pilot of a B-24 in World War II.
Late 1941. Hitler's war machine ravages Europe. Much of the continent suffers under German occupation, while Britain holds out amidst nightly bombing. To the east, the German army pushes to the outskirts of Moscow. Although Roosevelt quietly provides aid to England, America is not yet ready to plunge into war. That would soon change.
Members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
College was out on the 4th day of June of 1942, and I went down and enlisted in the Air Corps, and they said, well, you'll have to take the Air Corps examination, and I said, okay. So I went down on the 2nd of July to the old Federal Building in Des Moines, Iowa, and the examination's 3 hours long, and went in and sat down, and there were 3 of us that took the Air Corps entrance examination that particular day. So one fellow sat there and worked on it for about an hour and a half, and then got up, took the paper, tore it in two, threw it in the corner, and said, "To hell with that." And I thought, oh gee, you know, that's great. What are my chances? They blew the whistle and said the test is over. So the fellow that was there with me, he handed his in, and the monitor took a look at it and said, "Sorry, you didn't pass." So I thought, my God, there's 3 of us, and 2 of them have already failed, you know. Why should it change? So then I gave him mine, and he took a look at it, and he, me too. And he says, "Oh, you've passed, you've made it." And I said, "Good. What do I do now?"
With the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and America's entry into the war, pilot training in the U.S. Army Air Corps begins on a large scale. But deployment is slow, hampered by the lack of qualified pilots and the production of aircraft.
I guess the end of 42, I went back to college. And of course, when I got my serial number and everything like this, then I was called in with all the rest of the cadets that were in that area and said, "We don't need you right now, and what you need to do is go and stay out of trouble, stay healthy, but do whatever you want to do and have fun, because when we call you, we'll expect you to be there, and that'll be it."
January 1943. Soviet infantry in the Russian winter trap Hitler's 6th Army in Stalingrad. Harrington receives orders to report to Nashville, Tennessee, to be inducted as an Army Air Corps cadet. He is 22 years old.
They sent us to pre-flight, and that was at Maxwell Field at Montgomery, Alabama. And we went down there, and we were Air Corps cadets and pre-flight training. That was another 10 weeks of being Hell Week or hazing. I went out in calisthenics one day, and man, talk about workouts. We do all the calisthenics that the infantry and the field artillery and all the rest of the people do, plus we had other things to do. So I said to the instructor one day, I said, "My God, what are you training us for? To fly these airplanes, or do you want us to carry the goddamn things?" Which was, let's say, not a particularly smooth move on my part. Then I went to primary, and that was at the Embry-Riddle Flying School at Arcadia, Florida. So we went down there, beautiful. And of course we were there 10 weeks. And we started out with about 410 cadets. And this was where they washed them out. Every night when you come home, you'd take a look, and probably the bed that was next to you was empty. Because out of the 410 that we had to start with, at the end of 10 weeks, we had 198. 50% of them had been washed out. So this was a Stearman P-17, and this is where we learned to fly. I had a very good instructor, a fellow by the name of Lloyd Whitney, who was a barnstorm pilot in a flying circus. And he was good. He could do most anything with one of those Stearman. And of course I had a chance to fly, and anything that he would suggest we should learn how to do, I was much in favor of it because I was enjoying it immensely.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun.
After 10 weeks of primary, Harrington moves on to basic flight in Bainbridge, Georgia, flying the Vultee BT-13 trainer. He exhibits the skills needed for a combat pilot.
Hell of a roar. We live in faith, walk it out in flame. Hey, nothing will stop the Army Air Corps.
Cool nerves was a big help. I think the fact that I had seen the field artillery and the ROTC, and I did not want to go back to that, was a big incentive for me to work hard. And I think the instructor, Lloyd Whitney, gave me excellent advice as he would take a look and see what we were doing. And of course what happens to most people when they're flying an airplane and learning, the instructor says, okay, you got it, and they grab it like this, and of course then the airplane is following every move they make. Now the best way to fly is, of course, the stick is here, you walk in, put 2 fingers on top of it, and move it around like this.
After 10 weeks of basic flight, it is on to Albany, Georgia for advanced flight in the Beech AT-10.
The AT-10 was our advanced trainer, and that was a twin engine. And so then we flew that, and then when we graduated from that, then we were graduated and we were commissioned second lieutenants.
2 years ago, the Germans were beating down Holland and Belgium.
February 1944. Now an officer in the Army Air Corps, Harrington is selected to fly the B-24 Liberator heavy bomber and is sent back to Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama.
Had lots of fun in Montgomery, Alabama. The fellow who was the instructor was a captain. And he came by one day and he said, you got any money? And I said, well, yeah, I've got a few bucks. Why? He said, you want to go down to Miami with us? Sally Rand is doing her fan dance at the Biscayne Auditorium in Miami, Florida. And he said, there was a few of us decided we'll go on a cross-country trip. We'll land down there. We'll go see the show and then come back home. And we went down and we landed at the 36th Street or 36th Avenue Airport in Miami. Went down, checked into the Everglades Hotel in Miami, and that night we went to the floor show of Sally Rand, who they always used to kid. Sally Rand, who had 18 girls and 17 fans. So it was a good show. We enjoyed it immensely. Fortunately, I was not in charge of that, so I really didn't get in too much trouble. But the guy who was in charge, the captain, he really caught it, because we weren't supposed to be going cross-country with the B-24 to see Sally Rand and her fan dancers.
B-24 Liberator was the largest four-engine heavy bomber in the U.S. air arsenal. It was designed and built in San Diego by Consolidated Aircraft Company and introduced into the war in 1942. The Liberator lacked the sleek and glamorous image of its cousin, the B-17 Flying Fortress. But the B-24 became the workhorse of the American strategic bombing campaign in Europe and the Pacific. Over 19,000 were built, and they flew more missions and dropped more bombs than any other aircraft.
Well, the 17 was just a regular silhouette aircraft, while the B-24 was a tricycle landing gear, twin tails, very distinctive and everything like this. And they said, well, wouldn't you like to go in the 24? I said, sure, what the hell, why not? So I went to the 24s. I really didn't have much choice.
Despite its ungainly appearance, the Liberator flew higher, faster, and farther than the B-17 and could carry a heavier payload of bombs. Some felt that it was more difficult to fly, less stable at higher altitudes, and more prone to high-speed stalls.
The B-24 is a very nice, gentle airplane, but everybody gets in, takes a look, and says, oh my God, what a monster, you know, I got to hang on to it. It's not the way to fly the airplane. The way to fly the airplane is sit there relaxed, put your fingers on it, and if the plane has a tendency to be nose heavy, go down and take your trim tabs and trim it up so that the nose no longer is heavy. If it wants to fall off to the right or to the left, check your rudder tabs. See the tab. And once you get the thing all trimmed up so it'll fly itself, all you have to do is sort of sit there and look out and watch it go. And it's a very easy airplane. When you get in trouble and excited and a lot of things are going on, it is a heavy aircraft to maneuver because it's a big aircraft. And both the pilot and the co-pilot of a B-24 will need to be on the controls if you're, let's say, dodging airplanes or flak or doing anything that would be out of the ordinary.
The B-24 required a crew of 10 men. The pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and navigator were officers. 6 enlisted men served as radio operator, engineer, nose and tail gunners, and waist gunners. Harrington's crew is formed in Salt Lake City in March 1944.
The enlisted men on the crew were Bill Moore, Frank Grimes, Jack Spellman, Roy Johnson, Dale Perkins, and Fred Davis. And the officers, of course, are myself on the left. The co-pilot was Tommy Welsh. The navigator was Lloyd Ennis, and the bombardier was Herb Leopold. A good Jewish boy from the Bronx in New York City. And he was very conscientious about everything. He didn't have to worry about if somebody was going to do something and they weren't going to do it. If Herb was around, they did it, or else he did it for them. Tommy Welsh, of course, was co-pilot. He was never happy. He wanted to be a fighter pilot, and they put him in as a co-pilot of a B-24, and that's a long ways from being a fighter pilot. So although he was good, he could really fly, there was no question about that. He was just a little guy by comparison, but he was a fighter pilot, and he acted like a fighter pilot, and he looked like a fighter pilot. And the other was Lloyd Ennis, who was the navigator, and he was from down in North Carolina, and Lloyd was typical Southern, very slow. And one day after we had had a little skirmish and we had ducked out away from the crew, I said, Lloyd, give me a heading back to the field. He says, okay. He says, fly 270 degrees, which is, of course, fly west, until I tell you differently. So Lloyd was very good. He knew his navigation very well, and you could always depend on him, but he would give you some smart answer like, 270 degrees until I get around to it. I told them all early, I said, now I'm going to teach all of you to fly. I said, not takeoffs and not landings and not fancy maneuvers, but I'm going to teach all of you to get in this seat here, the pilot seat, and fly straight and level, following a particular heading, and then when you get over the airfield, you have me all fixed up and strapped into a parachute, and then throw me out and pull the ripcord, because I said I'll land down on the field, and all the rest of us can do the same thing. We won't worry about the airplane, but each and every one of us will be able to get back and parachute into our base.
In May 1944, the Harrington crew is finally ready for deployment. Orders are issued to join the 8th Air Force, the mighty 8th, operating from bases around Norfolk, England. The crew board ship in Bayonne, New Jersey for the rough and dangerous sea voyage to Britain. Over 15,000 men are crammed into the Queen Elizabeth ocean liner. The ship would have to take measures to avoid the lurking presence of German U-boats on the crossing to Glasgow.
We knew that we were going to England, and what happened was that we took off and we went for 5 days, and because we were unescorted, the Queen Elizabeth had to turn every 7 minutes. And the reason for that is that it takes about 7 minutes for a U-boat to line up a torpedo on them.
The Harrington crew is assigned to the 466th Bomb Group, known as the Flying Deck. Consisting of 4 bomber squadrons with 80 planes and crew, the group had first been deployed to England in March 1944. It flew from Air Station 120, better known as Attlebridge, after a nearby village. The 466th had an auspicious debut. Its first mission was all the way to Berlin, a trip of over 1,000 miles, some 10 hours of flying through enemy territory. It was the biggest daylight raid in the war up to this point, and only 2 planes were lost.
Well, when we got over there, we got a plane, and there wasn't any name on the plane or anything like this. So I think it was Jack Spillman and a couple of the guys, they decided we ought to name it and paint it. So I said, sure. And they decided that they would name it the Troublemaker and paint that little turtle with a machine gun sitting on the back, and that was painted on the nose of the ship. And that airplane was a good airplane, and we took good care of it, and I understand that it flew nearly 100 missions.
June 1944. The D-Day invasion begins as thousands of U.S., British, and Canadian troops fight their way up the beaches of Normandy. The Harrington crew faces the stressful conditions of flying combat missions for the first time.
Oh, it was foggy. I've been out on some days when we go out to look for the airplane. Now I couldn't find the airplane on the airfield because it was so damn foggy. And they'd say, we're going to fly. So we go out, and the crew chief had it all checked out and filled with gas. And armament was in place. Bombs were in place. We didn't do anything from memory. We had checklists. We checklist in everything and anything and everything. Gasoline, oil, cylinder head pressure, temperature, everything like this. We had checklists. And we would go through the checklist because you leave nothing to memory or guess. Because those who left things from memory or guess didn't make it over. If you're not afraid, you're dead. Man, that ain't fun. And you know you're going to get shot at. And if you get hit, you know you're in trouble. And they said, were you scared? And damn right I was scared. I was scared every time. And the more scared I was, the better flight I was, because I was more meticulous about everything I did.
Life-threatening hazards began at takeoff. With up to 8,000 pounds of bombs and a full fuel load, the B-24 needed every inch of runway to get off the ground. Pilots who pulled up too soon occasionally stalled, a deadly mistake at low altitudes. The day of the crew's first mission, a Liberator called Shoo Shoo Baby stalled on takeoff and crashed at the end of the runway. All aboard were killed in a huge explosion of fuel and bombs inside of the entire group forming up for takeoff.
And of course, what the mistake that so many of the guys made was that they pulled up too soon. You know, once you get that airplane, as long as you can hold it down on that runway and you're gaining speed all the time, it's good. But the minute you get that thing up off of the runway is of no value to you whatsoever. And that was usually a pretty nice place to be when you get down there and you drop below flying speed. And you go back down, you know, and bounce a couple of times on the end of the runway. We would go out and, depending on the mission, a lot of times we would top the tanks. Now by this I mean they'd send a gas truck out and you would be second or third in line, and they'd open up all the gas tanks in the top of the wing and top them, bring them right up so they're absolutely chock full, and then put them back down. That caused some problems because sometimes I remember a fellow would take off and the gas cap would be loose and the lift on the wing and the gas cap was sucking the gasoline out of the tank, and then it was spraying back across the formation.
Assembling hundreds of bombers in the cloudy skies above England was fraught with danger. Without radar to guide them, pilots had to fly precise patterns to avoid mid-air collisions on the way to the formation.
And then we go roaring down the runway, and when we would take off, socked in, you couldn't see past the windshield, you know. Then we'd get out there and then we would do a single needle width turn to the right, all the time climbing at 500 feet a minute, and then we would go 1 minute and we make another right turn, single needle width, another minute, and so what we did is we just flew a box up until you would break out. Well, when you break out, sometimes you would be 10, sometimes you'd be 12,000 feet. And you get up there, my God, here's these airplanes just popping up out of this soup all over. And you wonder how in the hell they could all be down there and not be running into one another. But if they all paid attention to what they were doing and flew up in accordance with their schedule, I'd have no trouble.
The B-24 was not pressurized or heated, so freezing temperatures and oxygen deprivation were constant threats. Once in the air, tight formations, wingtip to wingtip, were necessary both for the protection from Luftwaffe attacks and to ensure that bombs were dropped accurately on the target.
The guys in the waist, one of them called up and said, you know, waist gunner to pilot, do you know that we've got a B-24 wingtip that's about 10 feet outside our window? I said, yes. On the other side, have you got one over there too? And he said, yeah, we do. And I said, good. Don't let them get any closer to us than that, and we'll be just fine. Oh, I never will forget Roy Johnson. He used to get sick every flight. He'd have all kinds of bags and buckets and stuff like that he would take, and he was sick every mission. And he looked out and saw that wingtip that was about 10 feet outside the door, and some of the guys said, man, I'll tell you, I've never seen anybody walk up one side across the city and down the other side and just be as sick as a dog.
Once over enemy territory, bombers had to contend with deadly flak from ground batteries, especially the German 88, the notoriously accurate 88mm anti-aircraft gun.
A burst of flak is a little black puff out here. That little black puff is the shell that went off. It throws all this garbage at you, the metal pieces. Any of those little black puffs will never hurt you. It's the one that you never see that you get you, because once they've puffed, then they're done. But those that you never see, that comes up and puffs right under the ship or inside the ship or right above the ship, are the ones that will fill you full of holes. We never deviated because of flak. You know, we had a particular course, a particular speed, a particular altitude, and we went through.
Finally, there were the skilled Luftwaffe fighter pilots. They flew the fast and maneuverable Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 single-engine fighters, and were a highly professional force.
But the FW-190s and the ME-109s were really a first-class, highly experienced, and very, very good Luftwaffe fighter plane. We also had a few what they called the Ju-88s. They were a twin engine, smaller, and not too good, but they fired nothing but 20mm cannons. So when they come through, man, they left some big holes in the airplane, in the formation. They typically engaged by coming in high from the rear. And what would happen is that we had a lot of B-24s that had gone down, probably crashed, maybe not too severely damaged, but they were crashed. And the Germans would pick these up and take them in, and then they would take the pieces and put together a new airplane, or one that was capable of flying. So this means they had a B-24. They didn't have the proper tail markings and things like this, but they had these B-24s, and they would load them up with 50 caliber machine guns just like we had, and they had plenty of guns and plenty of ammunition from those that had crashed. And then they would infiltrate the formation, because they would either come in low and then they would work their way up into the formation, you know, waving at everybody as they come in. And they were all Germans, and they were simply waiting until they got close enough that they could wheel their guns around and mow off a couple of B-24s in the squadron. I learned about that very early, because we lost a couple planes that way. We'd be getting into bed by, say, 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon the night before. Okay, then we would sleep until probably about 2, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, and it would be through to get you up. And you knew that you had to get up because it was posted on a bulletin board that you were going to be flying, so forth, and you had to go and get breakfast, get a shower if you were going to take a shower, and go to briefing, and you had to have all these things done by a certain time, and generally that was somewhere around 3, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning.
The first combat mission for the Troublemaker takes place on July 28, 1944. The targets are rail yards and bridges in Amiens, France. But the mission is scrubbed in the air due to heavy cloud cover over the target. The next day, they bomb a synthetic oil refinery in Bremen, Germany.
We went in, and of course, since we were really new and inexperienced, Herb Leopold, who was the bombardier, set up the bomb site, and he set it on an intervalometer. So what happened was that when we hit the target, it'd go boom like this, and instead of all the bombs going, one, and then every about 2 seconds, 3 seconds after that, 2, 3, 4, and we had 59 bombs, 100 pounds, in the Bombay, and they would kick those out one at a time, and we went in the west end edge of town, right down across the middle of town, made a left turn, and right out the northern city limits of the town, dropping a bomb every 3 seconds or 2 seconds.
With Allied troops fighting their way through France, the crew of the Troublemaker flies almost every day.
No, life around the base was, you get up and you go flying, you come back, you get something to eat, you go to bed, and next thing you know, somebody was around shaking you, saying it's time to go.
Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. So there's one motor gone, we can still carry on. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. What a show!
Over the next 2 weeks, the Troublemaker bombs chemical factories in Ludwigshafen and Rostock, oil storage facilities in Hamburg and Ghent, a Luftwaffe air base near Brunswick, and marshalling yards in Strasbourg. 8 liberators from the 466th are lost during this period, resulting in 40 men dead and another 18 captured as prisoners of war.
Yeah, all of these targets that we went to, they were all very valuable to the German war effort. They had ball bearings, they had oil, they had parts that they were making for this. Some of them were parts for tanks and things like this, but that didn't make any difference. They needed those parts and we needed to get rid of them.
On some of these missions, they encounter little in the way of flak or Luftwaffe opposition, the classic milk run. On others, they are not so lucky.
One day we were supposed to go in and bomb, I think, at 19,000 feet. And the leader saw that the clouds were setting in, so he announced over the radio that we are not going in at the 18 or 19,000 feet, but we're going at 12,000 feet. And we'll bomb from there. Well, of course, every German fighter and every flak gun within 40 miles knew exactly where we were going to be and what we were going to do, and we knew exactly how fast we were flying. Because hell, we only had about one good speed when we were dropping bombs, and so we really took it that day.
When not flying, briefing, or sleeping, the men of the 466th had time for some relaxation and social activities. Sports teams were organized, and the men could read newspapers at the officers' club and watch movies in the tent dubbed the Opera House. Off the base, they would ride bikes to a local village pub, or get a pass into nearby Norwich, or down to London. In the city of Norwich, the Samson and Hercules Dance Club was a favorite spot for American air crews.
I never did get to one of the pubs or any of that activity that they had around Norwich or at Attlebridge. We were scheduled about the next week to go to the flak house at Norwich, But of course I never made it because it got shut down.
On August 18th, the 466th celebrated its 100th mission with an all-day party that featured an evening concert by the famous band leader and Army Air Corps Major Glenn Miller.
In the mood, Glenn, in the mood.
But Harrington would miss that party and would not see Attlebridge again for the duration of the war.
We had to put up 36 planes, so as a result, the colonel alerted 40 crews. Now this means that they've got a couple of extra crews alerted that can go, but they won't go unless one of the first 36 in the group, something's wrong. We were crew number 37 that day, that morning. And we went to briefing, we went to breakfast, we went to briefing, we went out, checked out our gear, and everything was fine. And we went out, and when it come time to fly, well, we went down the line, and everybody reported, all present and accounted for. And so they come by, and they said, all right, crew 37, 38, 39, and 40, you're stood down. Go back to bed. And I thought, oh boy. Well, it didn't take me 2 minutes to get out of there and get back over to the Quonset hut, peel off my clothes, and get back into bed.
The target is a Luftwaffe fighter base in Vechta, south of Bremen. The Luftwaffe have been launching rocket-powered fighters from Vechta to wreak havoc on Allied bombing formations. This would be a bold response aimed at crippling the German air defense. Hundreds of bombers from the U.S. 8th and 9th Air Forces and Britain's Royal Air Force are sent up to hit 25 Luftwaffe airfields in northern Germany.
And God, I no sooner got back into bed, and here comes the Jeep up, and I said, where's Harrington? And they said, you got to fly. And I said, that's impossible. I mean, my crew are all over the base. I've got 6 enlisted men I have to get. I've got 4 officers here that we have to get up and get going, and I can't possibly. He says, I didn't say we wanted your crew to fly. We want you to fly. We're short a pilot.
Because he has already been briefed on the mission, Harrington has chosen to lead a makeshift crew in an unfamiliar aircraft, the Ramlin Wreck. He does not know any of the men chosen to fly with him.
Oh yeah, I went out to the plane. Well, of course, I was late. And so I met the crew. Well, I met the crew and said hi, and they looked at me and said hi, and I didn't know them. I'd never seen any of them before.
Most of the crew needed to make up missions for one reason or another, and some of them seemed to be flying on borrowed time. Bombardier Bob Borst had been away at navigation school when his regular crew crashed on takeoff on July 13, killing all aboard. Waist gunner William Julian's crew finished its missions ahead of him, and engineer Tice Jones also escaped death only 3 days before. His plane, Gruesome Goose, went down on a mission to France with no survivors. Harrington and a co-pilot, Jim Miller, were selected at random to lead this group on the mission to Vechta.
One of the fellows said, well, now I want you to do a good job on flying this mission because this is my last mission. I get to go home after this one's over. And I said, well, good luck to you. I hope it all works out very well, but the thing about it is, get in there, do your job, handle your gun, don't let anybody get close to us, and we'll make it.
22 liberators from the 466th are already in line to take off. Ramlin Wreck is at the back of the formation. The group takes off around 9 a.m., later than scheduled. The weather is clear.
By the time we got back out to the line with the airplanes, we were down to the place where we were very near the last one to take off. This also meant that when we went up, we were tail end Charlie in the squadron as they flew over and flew back.
P-51 Mustang fighter escorts join the formation as it turns over the North Sea toward Holland. Flak is light on the way to the target. Once over the airfield, the group releases their bombs from 22,000 feet.
Later on, I found out we did a terrific job. We had 90% hit, and that's good when you use saturating bombing techniques. I know that one of our targets out of the plane that I was flying was to take the runway, and we were to fill that runway with holes and pockets and everything so that they couldn't use it to take off and land. And we went down that runway and we dropped our bombs on it, bang, 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 bang. And they said it would be impossible to put a plane or even the helicopters have a tough time finding a place to sit down. We dropped all of our bombs and everybody said, great. And I said, okay, what do we do now? Well, what we do is we pull up and turn left and join the formation.
Also mein Name ist Ernst Schäufele. Ich bin ein pensionierter Lehrer und
Ernst Schäufele was a Messerschmitt pilot and leader of Fighter Squadron 5, stationed at Sachau, 100 miles west of Berlin. He had joined the Luftwaffe in 1940 at age 17 and soon became the youngest lieutenant in the force.
bei einem Verband ich muss ja Englisch sprechen, in the JG5 on the west coast of Norway.
After months of combat missions in Scandinavia and Russia, Squadron 5 was called back to Germany in March 1944 as part of Hitler's defense of the Reich. Schäufele flew missions on the Western Front to defend against the Allied strategic bombing campaign.
And this was the hardest war I ever saw. When we started in a mission with 25 machines, mostly 18 came back. When only the four engine machines had come, it was hard enough. They had 4 guns from behind, and the only attack which could bring success is the attack directly from behind. And when you attack 20 B-24 or 20 B-17, you have 80 guns on your machine.
On August 15, he is alerted to fly north toward the Baltic Sea.
We started in Sachau and joined another group of the JG-53 under Major Götz on the Müritzsee in the northwest. Then we were led from the 1st Fighter Division in Berlin, we were led to Kassel. And then suddenly we became the command to fly north-northwest, and suddenly I saw a lot of lakes under me, and I knew, this must be Holland. And because the horizon was a little dusty, we saw the group of B-24 machines a little too late.
The 466th Formation had spread out some, but looked to be safely on the way home over the Netherlands. Everyone is relaxed, assuming the worst is over. It is almost 1 p.m.
Well, we had just joined the formation when these German fighters, the Luftwaffe behind us, come through, and they were not too happy what we had done with our bombs on their airfield, and they went through and they really cleaned us out.
At least 20 German fighters descend on the back of the formation in single file from above and behind. On the Ramblin' wreck, the tail gunner is hit and disabled or killed by machine gun fire.
The first wave of planes come through, shot out number 3 engine. Well, number 3 engine, you know, the prop comes up and from rotating at say 2,000 RPM to a twang and stop. So I reached up and I feathered the prop so that it wouldn't be a big drag or anything like this. And at the same time, the radio operator got hit, and he was badly hit and hit in the head and the face. So he was done.
Lieutenant Alfred Seidel, a Luftwaffe pilot in Fighter Squadron 300, recalled how quickly it happened.
When we got closer to the bomber formation, the Americans, much to our surprise, started to shoot flares and make a big fuss. Then we realized they were trying to get the attention of the fighters for help. Over Steinweg, our group flew right in the middle of the bomber formation, and we were able to shoot down quite a few.
The people that were in the front part of our squadron, they didn't even know there was a bomb or a fighter attack and a fight going on. They were just as happy as clams up there because they were way out in the head of where the fellows had attacked, and they couldn't do anything. They were too far away for them to do anything to help us.
When we all attacked, I saw one B-24 a little away from the other, about 40 or 50 meters to the right. And I flew my attack and began to shoot about 100 meters behind him. Directly from behind, he was shooting on me, yeah, and it was always the same. You could only hope that no bullet will hit you.
Schäufele zeroes in on True Love, flown by Jack Archer.
On the right inner motor maybe, came smoke and fire, and the machine made a curve to the left, to the right, and I passed the machine, made a curve to the right curve, and when I came back, I saw that airman jumped out with a parachute.
The second wave come through, caught number 4 engine, and also they got number 1, so that it was sputtering like mad. And number 2 engine was the only power we had, which meant that it was all on one side, and so we had to use a lot of rudder control in order to steer. Well, when they shot the tail gunner, they shot the pulleys loose on the cables that controlled the rudder, and so we had no way to steer or guide it. We just were dead ducks. So I said to the guys, hey, look, you know, if it ever gets to be the place where we got to get out and walk, I'm going to push this bailout button once, and I'm going to give you as close as I can to 1 minute. And then I'm not going to be up there saying, come on fellas, let's jump. I'm going to be down below saying, come on fellas, I've already been out. So they didn't panic, they just did what they had to do, and that was that if they were able, they got up, put on their parachute pack, and bailed out. I got up out of my seat, the pilot, and I held the airplane straight and level with the steering mechanism I had. Didn't need to worry about the rudders, they wouldn't do any good anyway. That's the feet control. So I got up, I stood up, undone my seat belts, checked the clasps on my parachute, turned around, took a look at the flight deck. Of course, the radio operator was blood splattered all over everything. And I was just 2.5 steps, or 2 steps and a jump from the bomb bay where the doors are wide open. So I just took the 2 steps and jumped and went head first, right out the, it would be the left-hand side of the airplane, the first bomb bay door. And it was on fire. It was not going to go too much further, and we had to get out and walk.
A total of 4 liberators are shot down in a matter of minutes. Aboard the Ramblin' Wreck, Harrington and 6 crewmen manage to bail out before the plane breaks apart in midair. Tail gunner Chester Zibb, along with Tice Jones and William Julian, never make it out.
So I jumped out, and I'm going to be a skydiver for a little while, which I did. And it was so peaceful and so quiet. And I thought, boy, and I looked around, and hell, there's no ground. The only thing I could see was sky. I better turn over. So I stuck one arm out, and of course you stick one arm out like a skier, you just roll right over. So I rolled over, and there was the ground right in front of me.
When I had shot down the True Love, I saw the first Doppelrumpf, the first lightnings, and I said through my radio telephone, lightnings. And I had still the red lamp, which showed me that I had only gas for 5 minutes. So I landed in an airfield. I thought it's Leeuwarden, but it was Havelte, and tried to get from my machine to the barrack, and suddenly 2 lightnings came on me down shooting, and I jumped in a hole. It was a normal day. It was a normal day, and I had a cup of coffee in the barracks and went to my machine and flew back to Sachau.
According to Dutch witnesses, the fuselage of the Ramblin' Wreck came down in this field, just west of the town of Steenwijk.
One of the large airplanes had a terrible explosion high in the air. It fell in pieces. The fuselage fell about 100 meters north of the bridgekeeper's house on the Steenwijk Canal. One of the engines lay in the road leading to Zuidveen. The tailpiece landed on the Potiek brothers' farm on the Leiweg, just west of town. The tail section containing the body of the tail gunner lay further to the southeast, near the canal. The land around the Leiweg was strewn with smaller fragments, including parachutes, flight caps, boots, and oxygen bottles.
So I thought, gee, you know, isn't that beautiful? It's all these little patches, they look like postage stamps. And there are little fields of this and little fields of that, and canals and everything, and I thought, wow, that really is nice. Then I got to thinking, I wonder how high I am. And got to looking, and I thought, oh, gee, there's something in that field down there, walking around. Maybe that must be cows. My God, I can see cows. And I grabbed that ripcord and gave it a jerk and opened up the parachute. Fortunately, I did, because the parachute popped, and I barely had time to get around and get a hold of the shrouds and slip myself over far enough not to land in the canal, but land on the bank side of it. And then all of a sudden I look, and in the mud alongside of me are all these little things that go like this. And I thought, I wonder what the hell that is. And then I smartened up and figured out that's a couple of German soldiers over there that were shooting at me, and these were the slugs that were hitting and being absorbed into that slick, gooey mud in the side of the canal. And I thought, oh my God, this is no place for me. So I unsnapped my parachute harness, and up over the dike I went down into the other side, which would be just a normal field.
Co-pilot Jim Miller and 4 crewmen from the Ramblin' Wreck are quickly picked up by German soldiers. They will spend the rest of the war as prisoners at Stalag Luft, the special POW camp for Allied airmen. Harrington and Bob Borst evade capture.
And I looked up, and my God, here's 5 guys standing out there in civilian clothes. And I thought, oh my God, now what? So they were Dutch, and I walked down towards them, and they walked towards me, and they were holding their hands up, as being friends. They were friendly, and so then they said, come us. So I come down, and they took the parachute and the harness. One guy took all the silk out of the parachute and went one way. Another one took all the ropes, the shrouds, and everything like this. He went another way. A couple more of them said, okay, we got to hide you. Well, I think that's what they said, because that's what they did. And so we walked over a little ways, and here was this hedgerow of trees and shrubs and bushes and everything, which would be a separation for the fields. And the bottom part of that was primroses. They were a good place to hide. So they kind of got a hold of some of them and pulled them, and they said, get in. So I crawled in, and boy, it was a sticky mess, but there I was, and I thought, okay, so one of the fellows had a little bit more English training than the rest of them. So he said, we'll be back. And then I could hear these Germans, shouting. And what they were doing is they were searching these hedgerows. And they had their guns and their bayonet, and they were going along and like this into the primroses in the bottom of the hedge. Well, there were too many of them for me to do much of anything, and I thought, well, I'll just be quiet. And they come down, and this one German soldier with his bayonet, and he stuck it into that hedgerow, and he stuck it in. I was in a fairly wide area, and he stuck it in over to the side of me and a little bit above me. And I thought, it's getting awfully close with that thing. And about that time, one of the German soldiers up the line hollered. I guess they had found some of the ropes or shrouds or buckles or something that one of the Dutch boys had taken up the line and stashed in the hedgerow. And so they found it, and they hollered, and everybody comes from every direction, over to see what they had. And after all the fire and the blood and the guts and gasoline and everything like this in that airplane, and then coming down and then being shot at alongside of the canal, it was so peaceful and quiet, it was just unbelievable. So here come a couple of those young men who I had encountered before, and so they said, come on. Well, I had nothing to lose. Come on. So I got out, and when we walked up to this farmhouse, and I had a glass of milk and a chance to wash my hands, and so then they said, well, we get you out of this and get you into some civilian clothes. And then in walks this German uniformed officer. And I thought, oh, hell. But it wasn't. It was Bettis. Bettis Oliphant was the man's name, and he was a soldier in Queen Wilhelmina's Royal Guard. So he could speak a little English. So he said to me, can you bicycle? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to get 2 bicycles, and we're going to ride down one of these dikes to town. He says, out here in the country, you're just like a wrapped up sore thumb. We get down into town, and you can kind of melt into the population, and you won't be as obvious. So we went down, and sure enough, here come a line of German soldiers marching down to add more help to finding me, because they knew that I was in that particular area. He rode ahead, and I followed him behind, and he would walk by, or he would ride by, and he would say, "Da." So then I would kind of not look at him, but just "Da," and we'd go on.
Harrington has moved to the relative safety of the market town of Steenwijk. Still, there is constant danger in occupied Holland. With a Luftwaffe base in nearby Havelte, German soldiers are always around.
Once we got inside and they closed up all the blackout curtains, why, they said, "Well, this is where you're going to be staying for a couple days." Okay. So they had an upstairs, and I went upstairs, and I was pooped. I had washed my face and hands and went upstairs and crawled into bed. And of course I could really sleep because I was tired.
Harrington is sheltered by several members of the Dutch underground. Bill Diemont was a teenager whose father ran a newspaper in Steenwijk. John and Lisa Kiesebrink hid him at their house in Annestraat.
Well, John was a tailor, Lisa was his wife, and they were part of the underground, but not very active because Lisa was pregnant. The first thing you do when you go into a house, now you sit there and you study, how many steps is it when you're like this and you get up? How many steps is it to this, and how far do you turn, and how many steps is it to the next one, and how many steps to either a door or a window or some place that you could get out, or maybe even it was a stairway that was going upstairs, which meant you could go upstairs and then go out through the roof. But you always had the exact number of steps, and we used to practice. We go blindfold and step certain number of steps up when somebody would say, "Okay, you got to go." I was known as Uncle Bob Duffstone, which means deaf and dumb. And of course I'd had a hard time pulling it off, but anyway, it was good. What they used to do is the Germans would go out and take things from the Dutch farmers, and then they would put it in this compound. So I said to the guys, "Okay, let's go and let's go and see what we can do about getting in here." Well, they had some little pigs, so we cut some fence wire and everything like this, and then we sent two of the Dutch boys to the opposite side of the compound, and then they started a shouting match, and then they would start a fight, you know. And the Germans thought that was just great. Here was these two damn dumb Dutchmen, you know, fighting down here because one run into the other. Well, about time that the fight got in, they was loud. Oh, they screamed and hollered and all this, and we got in with our wire cutters, cut the wire, took a croquet mallet type thing, you know, and took that pig and hit him in the back of the head with that mallet so he wouldn't squeal, and grab him. So anyway, we all took turns of carrying the pig, and it was damn good out there. We had fresh pork, the likes of which you hadn't seen in ages.
September 1944. Paris is liberated and Allied forces sweep through Belgium and approach the Rhine River. But the advance into Holland is thwarted after a risky Allied attempt to take the Arnhem bridges and cross the Rhine into Germany. Operation Market Garden is the largest airborne assault of the war, but British paratroopers land out of position and the Germans repulse the charge. Several months would pass before the Allies would again penetrate into the Netherlands. For the occupied Dutch, helping Allied airmen entailed significant personal risk. Locals caught assisting the enemy were routinely executed by the Germans.
If they'd have found me and determined that I was a pilot in the Air Corps, they'd have shot me and whoever was there. Of course, that's like the kid that I had this A11 watch. Well, you know, he wanted the watch, and I told him no, I wouldn't give it to him. Finally, he brought all kinds of goodies, like some gin and some brandy and some bacon, and said he wanted a watch. So I gave it to him and warned him. I said, don't let anybody see it, because they were very distinctive, and of course the German soldiers could tell them a mile away. And he got caught, and they picked him up and executed him.
Meanwhile, for family and friends back home in Iowa, there is no word of Harrington's condition or even whether he is alive.
John Kiesebrink from the airfield said that he had a couple of fellows that was coming by wanting to see me. Well, I didn't know how in the hell anybody knew I was there. But anyway, the word gets out. So what happens, but this German touring car pulls up out in front of our house, and these two in German uniform get out and come in, and here they are. They're United States Air Force officers, and they had captured these two guys that had the touring car that was German soldiers, taken their uniforms, transferred all their clothes, their papers, and everything like this, and here they were driving around Holland in this German touring car as German officers. Well, they want to know, didn't I want to go with them? Well, they didn't have a uniform for me, and I didn't think, no, I didn't really want to go without a uniform. So I said, no, I'll wait. When you get back this way again, I'll see about getting ready and get going then. Well, of course, it was only 2 or 3 days later we heard that they had gotten picked up and shot.
By December, as the coldest winter in decades grips the continent, the German army regroups into one last offensive on the Western Front. The Battle of the Bulge involves over 1 million German and Allied soldiers fighting in Belgium's Ardennes forest, just 100 miles from Steenwijk. Allied soldiers are trapped for weeks in the bitter cold, waiting the arrival of Patton's Third Army.
We would listen to BBC and listen, of course, that was not good, because the Battle of the Bulge was given a whole lot of airtime, and that wasn't good, because that was bad news all the way through. And it did get cold up in there.
Meanwhile, Ernst Schäufele's luck finally runs out.
On the 3rd of December 1944, we get a command to attack American supply near Aachen. Aachen was in these days already in American hands. When I had crossed the front line and saw suddenly trucks and jeeps and tanks on the street, it was terrible. It was a dark day, but the clouds were only 200 meters high, and the bullets came on me. So I made a curve to the right, and suddenly I had a noise, a krach, was ist das? Yeah, noise, and I had a hole in my cabin to the right, but they did not hit the right leg, but the left leg, and the front glass was black from oil, and so I came suddenly over an acre with tulips and made a belly landing. And after a few minutes came a helmet, a helmet down and up and down, and was a young American. Before I had hoped this would be a German soldier, but it was an American. And he was interested on a souvenir, and he took my left arm, and I think I gave it to him. I helped him, gave him my fighter watch. Yeah.
April 1945. As the terrible winter subsides, Allied forces establish a bridgehead over the Rhine into Germany and take Cologne. In the east, the Red Army closes in on Berlin. On April 13, one day after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, Canadian Army forces enter Steenwijk.
Of course, they said that the Canadians were coming, and so we went out on the roof of the house and got in behind one of the big chimneys that they had on there, and we laid up there and we watched. They had a couple of tanks. There was a big steeple downtown. I thought it was on a church. The Germans had set up a machine gun in it, and as the Canadians approached, here they were, they cut loose with this machine gun. Well, they wheeled that tank around, and it was about a 75 millimeter long tom, and he says "Kachogum" like that, and boy, I was standing there watching it, and the staple, it just disappeared. But the next day they come in town, and they set up about 2 blocks from where I was holed up. So I walked up, snapped to attention, gave him a salute, and I said, "Major, my name is Robert Harrington. I'm a lieutenant in the United States Army Air Corps." And he said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I got shot down." And I said, "I'll tell you what, I understood that you're going to Assen. Why can't I go with you?" Oh, he says, "You can." He said, "Do you know how to shoot a Springfield 30 caliber rifle?" And I said, "Yeah." "Is it bolt action?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Good." He said, "Here is one. Get in there, sit down, put the gun out through the peephole, and he said, you watch, and you're going to be looking out the backside of this armored car. Now, anybody who gets up and wants to surrender or anything like that, shoot them, and we'll find out if they were really serious a little later on." As he says, "I don't want to lose any more of my men in my armored cars."
After spending a few days with the Canadians, Harrington hitches a ride to Paris with a French air cadet in his plywood Mosquito trainer.
Went down to the opera and asked for a partial payment, and the fellow who was the finance officer down there said, "Okay." He said, "Well, we'll give you a partial payment. That's $88 in French francs." Oh, that was a bundle about this size, of French francs, because I think they were worth 2 cents. 2 cents a franc. And I had $88 worth. So I stayed about 3 or 4 days. And I was down there, and everything was going along just fine. I was having more fun than a barrel of monkeys. And these MPs said, "Hey, we've seen you around here 3 or 4 days. Where's your orders, and what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I just got shot down up in Holland, and I'm making my way back to my unit in England." He said, "Well, you're in no big hurry, are you?" They said, "Well, you don't have any orders, and you haven't been under orders for a long, long time, have you?" And I said, "No." So they said, "Well, we've got a job for you. We've got about 180 ex-POWs that were picked up in North Africa and had fought Rommel down there. And they have gotten back this far, and we need somebody who is an officer to be in charge and take them back to New York City." So they cut orders for us, and put us on a ship at Le Havre.
With Berlin in ruins, Hitler commits suicide on April 30, 1945. 1 week later, the war in Europe is over.
I arrived outside of New York City, outside of Long Island. We sat out there all night long, just outside of Coney Island. And you could see all these roller coasters and merry-go-rounds and stuff like that going at Coney Island. And then, of course, the next day they come out, put us on some small ship-to-shore craft, and we were taken in, and here I was back to Camp Kilmer at Bayonne, New Jersey. And that's where I'd gotten started on this whole lousy trip. The operator who was there said, "Well, don't you want to call home?" And I said, "Well, yes, I would." And Mom answered the telephone. So I told her I was in New York, and she wanted to know how I was and how I felt and everything like this. And then she turned around, she says, "And how much do you weigh?" And I said, "Oh, about 175 pounds. She says, "Oh, thank God," and hung the telephone up.
Remnants of the Attlebridge Air Base can still be seen today. The runways, hard stands, and control tower still exist, part of a modern-day poultry farm. Nearby is a granite memorial to the men of the 466th Bomb Group. The 466th flew more than 5,000 missions from this base between March 1944 and April 1945. 100 B-24s were lost at a cost of 333 dead and another 171 prisoners of war. Ironically, Harrington's original plane, the Troublemaker, went on to fly well over 100 missions, making it one of the longest-serving liberators in the war. His crew flew until February 1945 with a replacement pilot, R.C. Greenwood. All of them came back alive. But many others did not, including 3 men from the Ramblin' Wreck. In the nearby village of Weston Longville, an 800-year-old parish church contains a roll of honor in memory of the men of the 466th who lost their lives in the liberation of Europe. And in the village of Mattingly, near Cambridge, the American Military Cemetery holds the remains of the hundreds of men who flew in the war in Europe, but never made it back home. These are monuments to those who paid the ultimate price for freedom.
before the springtime is due.